heading to my desk if we get here in here.
Wait,
All
right.
So we're going to first talk about the argumentative essay tomorrow.
Yes.
So please remember that it's the same rubric that we used for the last argumentative essay. So the rubric is no different. I'll give you a hard copy during class tomorrow so you can reference it while you're, and we'll be in the computer lab so you can type it or handwrite it again. I'll give you a hard copy so that you can reference it while you're writing, but there's also a copy on the portal if you want to go back and review it. If you want a hard copy today, just stop by and see me after school and I'll print one and go run and grab it, okay? But there is one on the portal so you can just look at it on there if you want. You will have options, and if you get in there at 10:50, I will go ahead and give you the sheet with your options, because there's quite a few options, and so that way that'll give you a few minutes to kind of run through them and see which one you want to do. I think that it's going to be 4 to 5 options, so that'll give you a good. And then that way, hopefully you'll find that your annotations help you, because everybody's are different. And so but they're very broad topics, not in a bad way, but in a way that you can use. I will say that there's 1 or 2 topics that students have trapped themselves in the past by only using certain chapters to support their answers, and you will get points taken off if you do not use the entire book to support your answers. Meaning, I don't want you to just use the part that the last chapter, because that's the part that you read. I want you to use the whole book as support. Okay, these can't be supported with one chapter.
So do we have to use direct quotation, or can we
No, you do not have to use direct quotes. You do not have to use direct quotes at all.
So just reference.
Right, so textual evidence doesn't have to be direct quotes, but it needs to be references, but they need to be specific.
So specific to the flying fish, reference that little piece, say the flying fish did this and this.
Right, yep.
Please tell me we don't have to argue about flying.
Yes, and that's the other thing that so many of you kind of got in a trap of with the first argumentative essay. Instead of making arguments, you summarized the book or the story that you were writing about. So don't get into that trap of just writing this happened and then this happened and then after that this happened. And if you find yourself it's kind of in that pattern, then you probably need to rethink your structure. You can, write it down before you begin. What's your first argument and what are textual evidence to support that? What's your second argument? What's the textual evidence to support that? What's your counterclaim and what's the textual evidence to support that? Okay? Other questions about the essay tomorrow?
We're gonna turn it in .com, right?
Yes, you'll turn it in. You'll submit it to turn it in. I will try to have them graded by Thursday, but I'll definitely have them graded by Friday.
Should I be concerned?
If you didn't read, yes, but if you read, no.
What if, I'll try to read all of it.
Yes, you need to finish tonight, yeah.
Tomorrow has to finish the book.
The ending really isn't that long, though. What chapter are you on?
90,
I'm on 94.
probably.
Oh,
I
well,
read Philip pages last night,
Isn't
two
that
hours.
right?
yeah.
That's what
I
I
got
can do
so
when I go
much
home
stuff to
today.
do.
Yeah, I'm at
when I went to
93.
college and
Okay, yeah,
Washington.
the rest of it goes by very
I remember
quickly.
every-
All right, so let's talk about the book. And for those of you who haven't finished it, this is gonna really stink, but you still want to
No,
go back.
go ahead, because I'll understand it better when I read it.
You still want to go back and read it even after our discussion today. How many of you didn't finish? Okay, good. So the rest of you did. Okay, yeah. And I'm only asking that because it would be hard to discuss the end if no one read it. All right, so let's pick up with the island. Because we haven't discussed that because you guys had not read that chapter yet when you were supposed to. Just reminding you. So the island. Will someone describe the island for us? All right, Lindsay.
It's very green.
Okay, it's very green.
He's intoxicated by how green it is. And there's also meerkats.
Okay, all right.
Everywhere.
Listen.
At night, the island gives off this acid or whatever that kills fish in the fresh water, and the meerkats can't, because the trees aren't as acidic as the ground.
And he thinks at first that the fish are all dead because they're saltwater fish that have somehow gotten into this freshwater pond, but then he realizes that that's not the case.
There's like a 40-foot pond, and a bunch of dead fish come up through it.
Yes.
There was a tree too.
And the algae.
So so he finds this algae that he can eat, and it pretty much brings him back to life. He's pretty much dying when he finds this. What are some of his theories about the island?
It's an organism.
Right, he thinks that the whole thing is a living organism.
Because the trees are attached to the actual algae too.
Right, it doesn't seem that there's any root system that attaches it to anything, and it's not like an island. So he in theory, he believes that it moves, that it's a moving island, which would explain why no one can ever find it after he says anything about it. Well, we'll talk about that in a minute. So it has these trees and these meerkats. What's interesting? What are some interesting things about the meerkats?
Richard Parker started eating it.
Millions and millions.
Yeah, there are like hundreds of thousands of them.
Oh, and
They're
they
like
don't,
buns in the spring.
because they've never been on the island or anything else. They don't think anything's gonna hurt them.
Right.
Like when Richard Parker tries to eat them, they're like going for it. They're like, yes!
Yeah, they're like, my turn, my turn. That's what he says. He says they're like jumping up and down. There's no other animals.
Only animals.
And so he realizes once he decides, because
Yeah.
where was he sleeping at first? He was sleeping in the boat with Richard Parker. And then he decides to go sleep in a tree. And the tree, when it becomes nighttime, what do the meerkats do?
They all climb
Go
up
up
the
the
tree.
tree.
Right, and he's like, at first he thinks they're all coming to kill him. He's like, okay, so this is, what an ironic death. I'm going to be slayed by meerkats of all things when I've been living on a boat with a
That's
tiger.
in Indiana Jones 4 when the ants eat that guy alive.
Oh, I don't guess I've seen that
Horrifying.
one.
Ooh.
And so, but they weren't coming, and then we know toward the end of the chapter that the reason they all sleep in the trees is
He dropped
because
some meerkat.
Island is carnivorous.
then the island is carnivorous. Yeah, he drops a meerkat as a test, and he runs away. But then he climbs down, and what happens to his feet?
They get
Seared.
Right. Yeah, and even the algae that he tries to take from the island, what
takes
happens?
The rope away.
Yeah,
Attaches it to a rope and it eats it all
the
away.
algae actually eats through the rope, so the algae is what's acidic. But he finds the tree and this huge, it's not really much bigger, but they're all kind of big trees. But he finds this tree, and
It's in
That's
the very
fruit
middle.
growing on it.
right, and he
Yeah.
thinks it's fruit. And what does he do? He thinks that it's fruit with all of these stems. Well, what does he end up doing?
Takes all the leaves away. and
Right, it's just
food.
layer upon layer of leaves.
I think it was a molar.
Yeah, and he finds a human molar in the center of the
Yeah.
fruit.
And he finds 31 more, and it's a whole human set.
Right. So then
Oh,
he
it's not
peels
the
off,
only
and
one we found.
it's literally a whole human set. So what is his theory?
Somebody died.
That the island had eaten someone, and it just had not eaten the teeth yet, because that was the last thing, to digest.
It's like
It digests
find
the
a
rest of
word
the
there.
bones. It's crazy.
Yeah, it's already digested the rest of the bones, but the teeth are left. So he quickly decides to get off the island, but he waits till Richard Parker comes home, and then he.
He also took several meerkats.
Yeah, he took meerkats and while he was there, he also got very good at training Richard Parker. What did he teach him how to do?
Jump through hoops.
Right, he got him to jump through the hoop, literally, not maybe even metaphorically a little bit, because he was using the whistle. There was one point where it seemed like Richard Parker might attack him because he startled him. He came upon him when he didn't know, but what did Pi do?
Stood very still.
And then what did he do?
Stared
And then he
into
blew the
his
whistle.
eyes.
And chased
Yeah, and then when Richard Parker acquiesced and started walking away, Pi started screaming and running to him, to remind him who's boss. And he admits that training Richard Parker sounded easy, but it's only because Richard Parker was already an omega animal. He wasn't the alpha animal in the first place, and so. And they say that even with dogs, if you'll stare into a dog's eyes without looking away, you're showing the dog that you're the alpha animal.
But he's not actually a real tiger.
Right.
It's just his own like animal instincts inside of him.
Well, we'll talk about that. All right,
That's my
so
I
theory.
put that pie stone leopard.
My dog
That's
doesn't
what
like big
monkeys
dogs
do
when
when
anybody
a predator
invites
comes
them.
into their territory. They
True.
front face that and they all just stare and holler at the same
Yeah.
time. So that's what pie reminded me of.
Oh,
whenever he
Oliver
chased
like-
after Richard Parker screaming.
that's very true. All right, so where does he end up? Mexico.
Really?
Yes. Okay, so imagine this. He's leaving India, headed for Canada,
And he ends up
and he ends up in Mexico.
So he like went that way.
Columbus.
Isn't that crazy?
Kinda like Christopher Columbus.
Yeah,
That's
like
a lot
yeah,
to
like
say.
Christopher Columbus. Except for he was aiming for India, right? Wasn't he aiming for India?
Probably should backwards.
But and so he ends up in Mexico. I almost cry every time when they get to Mexico because what happens?
Richard Parker jumps out.
Parker leaves, and Pi is like, I really wish that we could redo our goodbye.
It was just kinda
anticlimactic.
No,
So
but
you're
it's
saying
so.
that-
But it's
Right, and that's how Pi felt too. Like Danielle said, it was anticlimactic to her, and that's how Pi felt too. He's like, it was so anticlimactic. Like I thought we were buddies. I thought that we were bonded, and you just left without even turning around to tell me you were gonna leave. You just left.
Yeah, I
And it's
expected
so
some kind of movement.
ironic because he was like, I hate when things aren't like concluded. And then the end of the book is such a like, it's not concluded.
Yes.
He's so
Well, and I throughout it, you guys wrote things like, "Oh, this is fluff, and I kept telling you, like, no, it's not. We kept seeing how things, and it's the same thing, like Richard Parker leaving and going into the jungle in Mexico. Richard Parker explains to the Japanese men, like, "Hey, so what? You can't find him. Remember, he told the whole story about the panther, not being found for however long."
The sloth had to do with it.
Mhm.
The sloths at the very beginning, he talked about three-toed sloths.
Oh,
and stuff. I have no
yeah.
idea what that had to do with the
Well,
story.
remember he talks, and I mean that's kind of explained in the beginning, just kind of showing you the things about nature that make sense. Like the reason nobody understands how sloths survive. Well, this is how they survive. So it all goes back to like connecting it all together to where some things don't make sense, even in nature, but they're still like the
So
island.
that's how he described it. So that's how he could have described it to the people who didn't believe the story. It's like
Yeah.
three-toed sloths. What do you think they survived? They're so
Right, and he does that throughout, when they're disbelieving him, like the bananas. Okay, so we're getting ahead of ourselves. So he goes to Mexico, or he gets to Mexico, and people find him. They take him to a hospital, and who comes to visit him in the hospital?
Japanese.
Richard Parker. Just kidding.
The Japanese reporters. Why are they Japanese reporters?
But they want to know what happened to this.
Right, because the ship was a Japanese cargo ship, and they want to find out what happened. Because with any kind of, a car accident, a ship sinking, no matter what happens, you have to file insurance, and insurance has to be, you have to have a whole story of how it happened. And so they're trying to find answers to finish their insurance.